At some point in any relationship, you'll reach a breaking point where there's no turning back. On a wet Friday night, I had it while riding shotgun in an Uber. I hardly paid attention as the gentle music playing in the car mixed with the sound of raindrops hitting the window. A mere touch, electrifying and forbidden, made my heart accelerate as his fingers brushed over mine. When he drew nearer, I did nothing to stop him. The repercussions didn't matter to me at that moment. His expressionless gaze, as if I were the sole object of his desire, was all that mattered to me. I just wanted to say how much I appreciate everyone coming out to this event and listening to my tale before I continue. Your love and encouragement have meant the world to me and my community. And I am so grateful. Sharing this hasn't been easy. Thank you for being patient with me while I share details of my life that I never expected to share. Let me tell you, my name is Tom. Sarah Collins is my name. At 36 years old, I reside in a peaceful Indiana suburb with my family as a stay-at-home mom. Mark, my spouse, is a travel-loving investment banker who is never idle. After 12 years of marriage, Ella and Jake are our children. We appear to have everything that society values in a blissful marriage: a lovely home, healthy children, and a fulfilling career. However, under the surface, there was a hidden malaise. I can't pinpoint when our relationship with Mark began to deteriorate, but it happened gradually over time. He stayed away most of the time due to his employment. Plus, he was too exhausted to do anything enjoyable when he got home. The chemistry we previously shared faded as we became more like roommates, polite and friendly but without the fire. In an attempt to fill my empty space, I immersed myself in parenting, joined reading clubs, and even tried yoga. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fading into the background noise of my own existence. Afterwards, I was in need of a ride one night. My car wouldn't start, and Mark had already left. I didn't want to skip out on my occasional evening out on my own, a dinner, because I had plans. Therefore, I summoned a ride via the Uber app. I first met Ryan in that way. I was surprised by Ryan. His black hair, piercing blue eyes, and self-assured smile betrayed his youth, which was likely in his late 20s. Rather than driving, he looked more at ease in a fashion magazine. My name is Sarah, he informed me as I settled into the rear seat. His tone was friendly and approachable. I also felt noticed, which had been a while. Ryan left an impression on me, even if the drive to the restaurant was dull. He seemed to genuinely care about my day when he questioned me about it and smiled at me in the rearview mirror. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. But now I see that ride as the turning point. Going grocery shopping a week later necessitated yet another ride. Surprisingly, Ryan was there when he pulled up. "Hey Sarah, it's been a while," he remarked, with his signature easygoing smile. It seemed like fate, even if it was just a coincidence. On the way, we had additional conversations. His goal in life was to start a coffee shop, and I found out that he was a part-time Uber driver to help fund it. His charisma stemmed from an endearing blend of self-confidence and ambitious drive. My children, my interests, and my recent feelings of stagnation were all topics I covered with him. As we locked gazes in the mirror, he remarked, "Sounds like you need more excitement in your life." His comments resonated deeply with me. Perhaps I did require a bit more drama. Perhaps that explains why I started using Uber more frequently, even when I wasn't in actual need of a ride. Ryan was a welcome change from my usual routine. So I told myself, he was also easy to talk to. However, I sensed there was more to it than that. I took an Uber to nowhere in particular one night after yet another day of feeling invisible at home. "Just drive," I told Ryan as I hopped in the car when he arrived. Even though he didn't say anything, he arched an eyebrow. A peaceful park on the outskirts of town was our final destination. "Are you okay?" We were sitting in the parked car when he inquired. I said that I am unsure. I simply needed to escape. With a grave expression on his face, Ryan nodded solemnly. Taking a break is sometimes all it takes to keep us sane. At that same second, I felt as though he grasped my situation like no one else. Neither did he offer advice or pass judgment. He offered nothing more than that. I confessed things I hadn't even acknowledged to myself as the discussion progressed. By the time he dropped me off, I felt a sense of relief. As I stepped out of the car, I expressed my gratitude for tonight. Anytime, he said, his grin continuing as he sped off. My thoughts kept returning to him as I lay in bed that night. He calmed me down and attentively listened to my words. I tried to convince myself it was innocuous, that it was merely a chance meeting with a like spirit. However, I sensed there was more to it than that. Unbeknownst to me, my entire universe was on the brink of a transformation I could never have foreseen. I had a peculiar combination of emotions that night as I lay in bed. Staring at the ceiling, I felt guilty, excited, and a longing that I hadn't felt in years. Just like every time he traveled for work, Mark's side of the bed was vacant. I had not felt wanted or alive for an eternity. I couldn't shake the image of Ryan's face, and his words echoed in my head like an incessant melody. You should live a life that is more thrilling. His certainty was misguided. For a long time, I had tried to fit everyone's expectations of me. I strived to fulfill the roles of a wonderful wife, a caring mother, and a selfless woman. The experience of being Sarah had slipped my mind at some point. I found Sarah alone, without the presence of Mom or Mrs. Collins. I sobbed softly that night, my tears falling upon my pillow. The reason being, I came to terms with the fact that I had been severely lacking in the areas of connection, attention, and love, and not because of Ryan. A haze of routинess enveloped the subsequent days. Get up, cook breakfast, put lunches together, do errands, drop off the kids at school, and then wait for Mark's nightly call from the hotel he was staying at. The questions he asked were consistent. Are the children doing okay? At your place, is everything all right? Plus, my responses were consistent every time. They're excellent. Sure, I can help you with that. However, I was not well. Alone I stood. I really needed someone to inquire. How are you doing? I promise I do. It was another week before I called for an Uber. A ride was unnecessary. All I wanted was to see him once more. Similar to when he stepped out of his car, Ryan's smile quickly spread across his face. His words, well, if it isn't my favorite passenger, surprised me. Beloved traveler. Even if he said it to everyone, it would have been irrelevant. At that very second, it seemed as though no one else was around. I don't know, he inquired. I whispered the location to him. His expression softened as he looked over at me in the rearview mirror. Bad day. One could argue that. He began to drive without saying a word, leaving the bustling streets behind. The city lights became hazy as we gazed out the window. I refrained from providing explanations, and he refrained from asking questions. The way he allowed me to be alone in the quiet was reassuring. Finally, we arrived at a remote vantage point with a view of the city below. After putting the car in park, he flipped the key to the off position and faced me. Would you like to discuss it? Subtly, he inquired. For a moment, I shied away. I wasn't accustomed to expressing my emotions in this way. Still, I felt like opening up to Ryan because of his composure and patience. With my voice quivering, I confessed that I have lost all sense of self. This life is a blessing, and I am grateful for my children. However, I am of the impression that I have become self-absorbed. It feels as though I am existing in a void, as if I exist in a vacuum. Neither did Ryan attempt to intervene or fix things. His gaze remained fixed on me as he merely listened. Resuming his speech, he finally told you that you were important. Perhaps you have forgotten how to believe it. Those words struck me square in the chest. While I try to collect myself, I look away and stare at the lights of the city. More to myself than to him. I told myself that I shouldn't even be here. I don't see why not. Asking in a low voice, he spoke up. Why? Because I am not portrayed here. I'm not the type of woman who would do that. She pauses for a moment, experiencing a surge of emotions once more. He spoke softly but firmly, and I felt his words pierce through my defenses. I gazed intently into his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Sarah, you should be happy, he told her. Refrain from letting anyone else guilt you over that. As for my response, I was at a loss. My heart felt like it was about to burst, and my thoughts were all over the place. I yearned to put my faith in him. I began to believe that I deserved more than the acceptance I had come to accept for myself. He gave me a little card that night when he dropped me off. As an aside, he smiled slightly and offered to be your confidant. He had neatly written the number on it. The number was neatly written by him on it. My heart was racing as I held the card close to my chest. Watching him drive away. It had been years since I had felt this vital. But a wave of shame washed over me as well as that surge of emotion. My apologies. What sort of mother or wife would seek solace in the words of an unknown person? I tried to convince myself it was innocuous. That it was merely a chat. And that nothing significant had transpired. On the other hand, I had an innate understanding that made me foolish. I stared at the card in my hand as I slipped into bed that night. It was obvious that I should just toss it, erase his number, and act as if nothing had transpired. No, I refrained from doing so. I thought it would be beneficial to keep it on my nightstand. Just in case. I had no idea what to do in that situation. I hoped that ID would find the solution. Time passed, and although my life appeared to be returning to its usual cadence, Ryan continued to reverberate in my thoughts like an unstoppable tune. I passed by the nightstand multiple times. Where my ID was lying. Concealed, he had concealed his card. And I could feel its pull drawing me closer. Usual presents, a stuffed animal for Ella and a puzzle for Jake, were waiting for Mark when he returned from his trip that weekend. I chose a bottle of wine from a pricey California vineyard that I went to see. The robotic nature of his peck on the cheek nearly hurt. Tell me about your vacation. Even though he hadn't picked up on the subtle shift in my demeanor, I kept asking with a steady voice as if it didn't bother me. He responded, busy, as he was already checking his phone for emails. Nonetheless, fruitful. It was a huge hit with the clients. I agreed, putting on an artificial smile. Later that night, as Mark slept peacefully next to me, I gazed up at the ceiling, lit up by the light from his phone. Despite his presence, I experienced a profound sense of isolation. Ryan slipped into my thoughts. I thought about his smile, his words, and how he elevated me beyond the role of wife and mother. As I extended my hand toward the nightstand, I felt the card's edge brush against my fingers. I reached for my phone and started typing a message before I could stop myself. Hi, my name is Sarah. Please know how much I appreciate you taking the time. I hope for nothing but the best for you in the future. Wishing you the best. Despite my racing heart, I could ignore it and pretend as if nothing had happened. I could walk away and pretend that nothing had happened. However, I proceeded to hit send. The response was nearly instantaneous. Hello, Sarah. I appreciate the text message. I wasn't expecting to get a response. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here for you. My eye felt a mix of excitement and terror as I glanced at the message. I tried to convince myself it was meaningless since it was only a text. However, I harbored a nagging suspicion that this was the beginning of something greater than myself. A situation beyond my control. A far stronger emotion, one I hadn't given myself permission to feel in years, suddenly overtook it. The emotions were scattered everywhere. The days that followed were filled with a range of emotions. Every time I picked up my phone, I received a text message from him. Despite their simplicity, his comments caused my heart to accelerate. Anytime you need to chat. It was the only thing that renewed my energy after years. But I knew it was wrong. Mark remained unchanged, a mere reflection of the man I had once adored. The sensation that I was growing estranged from him seemed to intensify with every passing day. My world shrank as I focused on children, cleaning, cooking, and waiting for his calls. He continued to prioritize his work. In my own life, I did become a ghost. Once again, I found myself contacting Ryan on a wet Wednesday. My heart was pounding as I hit send this time. But the words came more readily. Please, someone, I need to chat to. I realize this is probably strange. Are you available? We sent a reply almost instantly. The reply arrived almost instantly. In 20 minutes. I understood and got you. I completely disregarded the idea. The thought of it made me feel uneasy. I hadn't felt this awake in years. Thanks to the excitement of the unknown and the anticipation of doing something I should have known better. I promised the kids I would return quickly after putting on my shoes and grabbing my jacket. Not even Mark knew where I was. Whereabouts? I stood outside my house in the drizzling rain, feeling the icy wind sting my flesh. And in what seemed like an eternity, Ryan arrived. I felt my heart skip a beat when he grinned at me the second I stepped into the car. "I don't know," he inquired. My voice quivered a little as I pleaded with them to just drive. And this time, we allowed no casual talk or questions. There was an electric current to the ride that we couldn't turn off. The tension between us was so great that we didn't even need to exchange words in the initial few minutes. In the reflection, his gaze shifted to mine, and I beheld an intensity in his eyes that caused my heart to race. It was more than simply empathy or comprehension. Something more profound, something unsaid, was at work. "Hello, Sarah," Ryan spoke up at last. Although his voice was timid and quiet. "I must inquire, what exactly are you seeking?" The words felt heavy in my throat, so I swallowed. I had no idea what I was seeking. I had neglected my own needs and desires for far too long as I focused on pleasing other people, trying to be the ideal wife and mother. Cry out, "I don't know," and I'll keep quiet. My life is meaningless, and I just need to know that. Somebody needs to make me feel like an actual person, not merely a mother or wife. Ryan's expression softened, and he extended his hand to place it on the seat next to mine. I wanted more of his soothing touch since it was so warm and pleasant. I had never before let myself be so exposed. To confess how desperately I needed a helping hand, Ryan spoke softly, gently suggesting that you matter more than you realize. My opinion is that you should experience a sense of vitality once more. My heart was pounding as I teetered on the brink. Before things got out of hand, my gut warned me to back off and apply the brakes. However, his words and expressions compelled me to give in to our hidden connection. The rain tapped against the windows as we drove in quiet for a while. Yet there were many unspoken words in the air between us. I don't know what happened, but before I knew it, we were parked in a remote area by the river, with the moon and stars casting a peaceful glow around us. Ryan shifted his attention to me as our faces were almost touching. His eyes were black with an unidentified emotion, and his breath was heated. "Is this proper?" With a nearly whispered voice, he inquired. As I met his gaze, I felt a release of guilt that had been weighing me down for quite some time. Mark and the life I'd left behind remained completely out of my mind. This one moment, when Ryan made me feel alive, visible, and wanted, was all I could think about. I leaned forward, drawing nearer to you, without speaking, as his warm, gentle lips brushed against mine. I felt as if the world had stopped spinning for an instant. There was an overwhelming want for more intense emotions, but no remorse or fear of repercussions. As our hands explored one another with a fervor I hadn't felt in years. The kiss intensified and the world around us faded away. Surreal and enthralling, it was as if in a dream. Suddenly, the kiss came to an end, almost as abruptly as it had begun. My heart was racing, and I was gasping for air as I withdrew. A surge of terror washed over me as the gravity of our recent actions hit me. With a trembling voice, I whispered, "I should have known better than to." Ryan initially remained silent. His expressionless eyes conveyed a combination of understanding and another quality that eluded me. He spoke at last, reassuringly. He reassured her, "You need not clarify, I am already familiar with this." However, I was aware before. I felt as though we had crossed an unrecoverable boundary. I could feel the gravity of my choice as we sat in the peaceful vehicle. A twinge of excitement from the kiss lingered, but a rising fear lurked beneath. Uncertain of my preparedness to confront the ramifications of my recent actions, I found myself entangled in a world from which there seemed to be no simple exit. But I didn't care at that moment. What frightened me more than I cared to admit was the fact that all I could think about was how Ryan made me feel. Everything after that night faded into memory. I was completely disoriented, as if I were floating through life in a fog. Every time Mark returned home, he kissed me and wanted to know how the kids were. I pretended like nothing was wrong. Despite the transformation, everything remained the same as it had before. Like a shadow that wouldn't budge. The weight of guilt never let me relax. no matter how calm it was. That night with Ryan lingered in my mind. As I slept, the sensation of his lips on mine and the sound of his breath against mine lingered in my mind. The reality of my actions, however, started to set in beneath the first excitement. I had dumped my spouse. No matter how much I tried to justify my transgression as an isolated incident, I knew it was more than that. I had crossed an uncrossable line. I desired it. That scared me since I needed it. Beyond the physical act, there was more. It was the bond, the way Ryan validated my worth. The life I had created with Mark elevated me above the status of a mere supporting player. Mark has always been an excellent spouse. He was a dedicated worker who loved our children and supplied for us. Unfortunately, his love for me faded at some point. He failed to recognize me for who I truly was. Despite sharing a roof, we failed to form a true bond as we went about our lives. However, Ryan had seen me, truly seen me. I was more than a wife and mother to him. I was Sarah, a woman who wanted, needed, and yearned for more. Because of that, everything became really complicated. This was more than a passing moment of vulnerability, wanting to be noticed once more and have a sense of significance. It was a plea for assistance. He occupied my thoughts constantly. It wasn't long after our kiss that I picked up the phone to text Ryan again. Perhaps all I desired was to hear his voice once more, to experience that connection, and to remind myself that I wasn't invisible. I didn't know what else to hope for. That night keeps popping into my head. The response was quicker than I had anticipated. I haven't been able to get that out of my thoughts either. You are on my mind, Sarah. That one sentence sent a shudder down my spine. He was contemplating me, not just as the spouse of a frequently absent man but also as myself. Plus, it was like I hadn't felt that in a long time. A part of me, still rooted in my life with Mark, urged me to halt this perilous game before it spiraled out of control. It was the wrong thing for me to do. I typed back, my fingers trembling. I've never been the kind of person who cheats. These days, I have no idea who I am. As I anxiously awaited the message, my pulse raced and my breath caught in my chest. 2 minutes elapsed. At long last, Ryan responded, "Feeling alive is what every woman deserves. Sarah, I understand, but you must not let guilt consume you. There are others who have also been seeking something." Breathing deeply, I closed my eyes. It seemed like I had no say in the matter anymore. It wasn't only Ryan and I that were involved. My heart was in it. I yearned for him. To feel wanted was my desire. The silent misery of my marriage was something I wanted out of. Mark, my family, and my obligations continued to bind me. My mind would whirl, engulfed in an internal conflict that kept me awake at night. There is no one I could confide in about this. Mark would never know. My pals would never know. I had to maintain acting normally even though I was falling apart on the inside. My feelings of conflict were at an all-time high when I saw Ryan again. He texted me first thing in the morning, wanting to know whether I needed a ride. And I wasn't expecting it. Once again, I found myself sneaking into his car's backseat because I had no choice but to take it. The ride was unique this time. No short chat or informal discussion took place. Our relationship had finally reached its peak. A heavy sense of anxiety pervaded the atmosphere. Ryan looked across at me in the rearview mirror, and his gaze lingered on mine for an excessive amount of time. "Are you okay?" His voice was low and worried as he inquired. "Cry out, I don't know, and I'll keep quiet. I am completely confused." He did not push me. He did not ask me to explain. He continued driving instead, merely nodding. The weight of the utter stillness between us was too heavy to ignore as we rolled through the peaceful streets. We weren't merely forming a temporary bond. In other words, I was actively deciding to let this happen. At last, he arrived at a park. A place I had never been previously. The park was silent save for the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. With the engine off, we sat in the stillness. Our stress palpable. I feel like I'm slipping away. My voice quivered as I finally spoke. The words have been circling in my head for weeks, but I'd never spoken them aloud before. I have changed a lot from my past self. I have lost all sense of self-identity. Ryan initially remained silent. All he did was put his hand on mine. The soothing sensation of his touch enveloped me for a brief moment. Listen, he whispered. You're under no pressure to solve it immediately. No one can help you through this. Regardless of the situation, we can approach it methodically. I wanted to believe him for a second as I stared into his eyes. I desperately wanted to think this was the solution. That this bond, this sense of belonging, would solve all my problems. But deep down, I knew it was true. Despite Ryan's ability to energize me and make me feel desired, I couldn't sustain this way of life. Before long, I would be overwhelmed with guilt. In the end, I would bear the responsibility for my choices. However, at that very moment, I preferred not to dwell on that. All I wanted was to feel anything at all. I also felt like I finally had someone who got me after all this time. Ryan promised to see me again at the end of the night. I was unsure of the timing and method, but I was determined not to give up. I was more afraid of that than I wanted to acknowledge. I couldn't escape the overwhelming sensation that time was passing me by. I can feel my heart urging me to stop. Along with the shame and eagerness, I felt like a storm was brewing inside of me, and I couldn't seem to find a way out. When I was around Ryan, it seemed as if I were in another universe, where the intensity of our connection and the rush of emotions we shared were the only things that counted. The consequences of my decisions loomed large over me whenever I crossed paths with Mark. Life had become a precarious journey. At home, my roles as wife, mother, and caregiver remained unchanged. I prepared dinner, assisted with my homework, bid goodnight to Mark, and smiled when it was appropriate. I was someone else on the inside, though my identity had completely crumbled. Years of boredom had eroded the once content woman's needs and ambitions, and she had become someone whose existence she had made alone. Ryan, in his subtle manner, had rekindled those longings. Every day that passed without his presence felt like an eternity to me. As if I needed reassurance that he was thinking about me. I couldn't stop looking at my phone. I felt helpless, but it wasn't good for me. It became a habit for me. Just like a drug. Ryan's message finally reached me. His words caused a pause in my heartbeat. Can we meet up later on? It would be wonderful to see you. As I pondered my next move, the world around me became increasingly silent as I fixated on the message. A small part of me wanted to just leave it all behind and go. But then I realized how awful things really were. Everything was back to normal. Mark was at home. The kids were upstairs, and nothing had changed. However, the situation was not as it seemed. Dislike it. No more. I was slow to reply. Attempting to make sense of it all. I only sat there, motionless. My family and the life we had created together with Mark were important to me. And I wanted to be loyal to them. One part of me had been silent for a long time and was screaming for a revitalizing experience. It would be there. I just had to wait until I couldn't take it anymore. We arrived at a decision. When I informed Mark that I would be away for a bit, he accepted my request without hesitation. I could have avoided the need to clarify. For quite some time, he had been disinterested. With my hands clenched on the wheel and my breath racing, the drive to see Ryan seemed like a blur. Rather than excitement, fear was the source of my racing heart. My apologies. Why had I given in and let myself come to this point? On the outskirts of town, I found a little bistro with low lighting, the type of spot where you'd be sure no one would notice you. Predictably, Ryan was already standing outside, carelessly leaning against his vehicle. There was a brief respite from the burden I was carrying when he recognized me and his face lit up with that comforting smile. You came, he whispered with an air of knowing familiarity. I couldn't think of anything to say. It was more than a slip-up. I refused to face the reality that I had allowed myself to sink into something more serious. Rather, I merely nodded. After Ryan escorted me inside, we found a quiet spot at a corner table and sat down. At first, it was simply casual small talk. But I could tell that tension was simmering beneath the surface. Neither of us could ignore the significance of the words or looks that passed between us. We were drawn together like two magnets. Ryan leaned in closer and whispered, You know, Sarah, I think about you all the time. This is broader than that one evening. By you, I mean your identity, needs, and desires. My heart sank. My pulse is pounding. That someone who could get past my exterior and comprehend the real me, the one I had grown distant from, was precisely what I had been yearning for. In a barely audible voice, I expressed that I had completely lost my sense of direction. All of this is making me feel like I have no idea who I am. Across the table, Ryan extended his hand and delicately touched mine. For an instant, I allowed myself to believe that he was my soulmate when his touch was so soothing and warm. He elevated my status beyond that of a housewife, mother, and caregiver, and I felt like I belonged. Sarah, you are not losing who you are, he whispered. Rediscovering yourself is all that's happening. There should be no concerns about it. Was it truly acceptable, though? Would it be all right to abandon all that I had created? Could I abandon the life I had built with Mark? A life that had been my rock for so long. Regardless of the circumstances? I had no idea. It was a mystery to me. But the more Ryan talked, the more I felt sucked into his universe and less into mine. Nothing was requested of him. He never once asked me to abandon my loved ones or make a life-altering choice. He merely wanted me to open myself to him, to trust him with the hidden pieces of my soul that I had kept hidden for far too long. Worse, that posed a threat. We emerged from the house and stood in the crisp night air as the night progressed. For an instant, when Ryan held my hand, I felt like nothing was complicated. Oh, guilt. And it seemed like there could just be the two of us. There was nothing to fear. Just the bond we shared. However, it became clear to me as I stood there, staring into his eyes, that I had come to a turning point. It would be easy for me to continue along this road, following my heart and soul wherever it may go. Alternatively, I could go back to square one, confront the life I had created, and learn from my mistakes. My voice quivered as I spoke. I must depart. I withdrew my hand from his, the words weighing heavily on my lips. No disappointment showed on Ryan's face as he nodded. He was not trying to convince me to remain. He only grinned, the same compassionate grin that had me believing I was alone. Sarah, he whispered softly, it will be here. I will decide according to your convenience. The decision's weight crept up on me as I drove home that night. I was unsure about what was ahead. It was unclear to me whether I could separate myself from this bond and the need to be acknowledged or if I would succumb to it entirely. However, I was certain that I couldn't revert to the previous state of affairs. The following days were filled with emotions that ran counter to each other. That night, I was still reeling from what had transpired when I got home from the cafe. I attempted to resume my usual activities, such as preparing breakfast for the kids and doing laundry, but I was unable to. With each passing hour, the burden of my actions, both past and present, grew heavier. Mark had not changed, even while he was here. He was absent-minded and late from work and home. The stifling quiet of our home was a change from my typical state of being apart from him. Not only did Ryan give me a renewed sense of vitality, but I was also starting to see how much of who I was I had lost in my marriage. I had shrunk to a semblance of my former self. Yet with Ryan, I encountered something novel, which reinvigorated my sense of wholeness. What price, though? A text message from Ryan was waiting for me when I awoke one morning. Sarah, I will miss you. How about we chat soon? With an aching heart, I gazed at the TV. There was an irresistible need to see him again, and I couldn't resist. Continued engagement, however, would inevitably result in additional deceit and suffering, as I knew in my heart. Eventually, I had to face the truth. I had to stop acting like everything was fine. I vowed to myself that I would face the truth about my marriage. Have a conversation with Mark, and attempt to mend the rift that had festered for far too long. However, I am unsure of how to convey this to him. Since he stopped seeing me a long time ago, how could I break the news that I had discovered someone else who brought me joy? Actually, I was petrified. I was worried about the consequences of becoming destitute. Worried about how my activities may be seen. I was still standing in the kitchen that afternoon, stirring a pot of soup, when Mark arrived home early that afternoon. Upon entering the room, he had a glum expression, clearly exhausted. Oh, he whispered softly, we ought to have a spirited discussion. It broke my heart. I sensed an inkling of the direction this was taking. My thoughts were racing as I set the spoon aside and faced him. Is that all right? Despite my shaking hands, I attempted to sound nonchalant as I asked the question. Initially, Mark remained silent. His gaze remained fixed on me as he studied my eyes. At last, he broke the silence. Without raising his voice, he stated, "I know something's been off between us. Even though I have no idea what's happening, I can sense it. You have been emotionally distant. And I too have been aloof. I believe it is imperative that we resolve this matter." Sarah, his remarks were so devastating. Things weren't right, and I'd known it for a while. But hearing him say it aloud brought it all home. The weight of my treachery was crushing me. I can't stop salivating. As tears welled up in my eyes, I mumbled something. "I'm unsure if we can resolve this situation." As Mark inched closer, he extended a hand toward me. "I have my flaws, Sarah. My apologies for my lack of attention. Still, I would hate to see you go. I would prefer not to let go of what we had." It was right there. I finally got the confession I was hoping for. He made a frantic effort to contact me. Despite the repetition of his words, they now carried a new meaning. His speech had an obvious hint of anguish. The long-lost vulnerability finally surfaced. Was it too late for him to try and get in touch with me? With a step back, I withdrew my hand. "Can I return? I'm not sure." My voice quivered as I murmured, "As things are, I'm not sure I can maintain this facade." Mark's expression turned somber, and I finally had a glimpse of the man I'd fallen for after all this time. He gave me an expression that suggested he had finally understood the anguish I had been through. As if he had never seen me in all these years. "Does anyone else exist?" His voice was barely audible as he whispered the question. The question hovered between us, heavy with truth. This is a question I never imagined I'd have to answer. Yet here we are. I also understood that if I answered honestly, it would alter the course of events. My pained heart prompted me to shut my eyes. Whispering the words, I whispered yes, even though they burned my tongue. "Someone else is out there." Mark's face turned pale as he expressed a blend of pain and shock. "Sarah, I'm confused. What would you do? You have no right to treat us this way." His question left me speechless. What if I tried to convey that Ryan wasn't the only one involved? I wanted to emphasize that the situation wasn't as simple as cheating. My needs, the things I had been lacking, and my needs alone were the focus. I would ruin everything if I tried to convey that to him. "I apologize." My voice trailed off as I uttered those words. "This is completely out of my control. Your pain was never my intention." For a considerable amount of time, Mark remained motionless. With a final motion of his hand over his hair, he averted his gaze. "I am unsure of how to proceed with this situation." He sounded really moved. "Sarah, I need some space. Let me consider this." He departed after that. As he stepped out of the room, I found myself standing in the house's relative silence. My body froze. My mind was blank. My heart was the only sound in the room. I can still hear the reverberation of my decisions. I waited silently that night for Ryan to send me a message. And I stared at my phone. Yet, that day never came. Suddenly, a realization dawned on me. That's what I'd been stewing over for days. This way of life is too much for me to bear. Lying and deceiving just wouldn't work for me. I needed to decide. Staying with Mark would give me the chance to put everything back together. I had the option to either continue on the path I had started with Ryan or to give up everything that was comfortable and familiar to me. Whatever I chose, though, I understood that my life would change forever.